Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about the Hoosiers. Welcome to the Inside Indiana podcast. This is Editor-in-Chief Ken Bikoff, along with publisher Ed Magoni. And Ed, major news rippled through the college football world earlier this week when Ohio State head coach Jim Tressel resigned under mounting NCAA allegations. It's certainly a subject Hoosier fans can relate to in the wake of the Kelvin Sampson mess from a couple years ago. And Ed, I wanted to get your thoughts on the resignation and what impact, if any, it'll have on the Hoosiers.
Well, my thoughts on his resignation are, I expected there something to go on with the NCAA investigation into the whole tattoo parlor / cover up, but I didn't expect it to happen on Memorial Day of all days, and also that unexpectedly I figured there'd be some build up prior to that, so it really caught me off guard. Monday when the news broke. And I think it caught a lot of people off guard just because, the Ohio State administration had taken such a proactive stance to keeping him around and making sure that he was still going to be their coach heading into next season. And then all of a sudden it was just a complete 180, and they told him either resign or get fired. I mean, they called him back from vacation with his wife in Florida, so they needed to meet with him on Sunday night, and he was gone Monday. So it came as a shock. I'll be honest with you. I didn't expect it to happen this fast. I thought maybe it would happen after the NCAA ruled on their findings, but this really caught me off guard. But as far as the Hoosiers are concerned, I think this opens the doors for Kevin Wilson to go into Ohio and steal some awfully good recruits from Buckeye territory. That's the way I view it, and I think it can only be a positive for Indiana. As far as the recruiting front goes, they've had some success in Ohio, getting some quality players out of there in the past, and certainly this can't hurt their situation with those kids. There's going to be uncertainty at the state in that state's #1 program for the next year or two, and it's really going to set their Ohio State's recruiting back, I would think. Until they decide on who their new coach is going to be. And certainly Jim Tressel had a great reputation amongst the high school coaches there. So I think this really opens the door for IU to step in there and steal some 3- and 4-star kids from the state of Ohio.
So you mentioned about there not being the buildup towards Tressel's resignation. To me, it was kind of a low-pressure buildup. I'm actually shocked that Ohio State was willing to pull the trigger on this thing, considering how weak an effort they made when this first came out prior to the Sugar Bowl. I mean, at first it was a thing of, well, we're going to look into it, but we're going to make sure the players can play. Then Coach Tressel said that the players could play in the bowl as long as they agreed to come back and skip the NFL draft and come back and play here in 2011 and serve out their suspension, which I found to be real shady at the time as it was. And I think I wrote in Inside Indiana magazine in one of my columns that was akin to blackmail, basically, of those players. And as things started to build, he was first going to be suspended 2 games for not telling the administration about some legal issues that some of his players may have been involved in. And then they extended that to 5 games and fined him $250,000. And as this thing started to just snowball and come out, it became clearer and clearer that Coach Tressel, if Ohio State didn't make this move, if they didn't go ahead and pull the trigger on this thing, it was going to make that administration look really, really weak, which already, the school president had said that he wasn't going to fire, and he was just hoping that Coach Tressel wouldn't fire the president. That made the administration seem weak. So I think that as the evidence mounted, I think that was really something that Ohio State got painted into a corner. And, I've heard it talked about, Ed, that all of this could have been avoided had Coach Tressel not started kind of a ball of lies, or had told the truth, been a little bit more open with the administration, maybe as early as a year ago, he'd still have a job in Columbus right now. And this whole I've been fascinated by it because after watching what Indiana went through with Kelvin Sampson, they kind of gave Kelvin a chance to redeem himself, and they, by not firing him when the allegations first came out, and eventually Coach Sampson lost his job. But all of those were self-reported issues, things like that. So it's been interesting to me just to compare and contrast how Ohio State has dealt with the scandal and how Indiana handled their scandal. Your thoughts are just kind of how those two schools have dealt with things differently.
I'll tell you the one thing that Ohio State handled right was getting out of Tressel's contract without having to pay him off any money.
Absolutely.
I mean, IU had to buy out Sampson's contract. Tressel didn't cost Ohio State a cent, and he had a lot better winning percentage and record and longer tenure and everything. So it's shocking that they were able to slither out of his contractual obligations without any kind of financial cost to the university.
Well, and I think that says something about what they had on Tressel and the ongoing investigations that they had going internally. That obviously, if you're able to get out of that contract, which is worth about $3.5 million a year, without having to pay him any money, that must be pretty clear cut. That the school felt and that Coach Tressel agreed that that he was kind of running afoul of his contract.
Right, and you brought up the fact that the differences between the Kelvin Sampson and the way the university handled that situation, the IU handled that situation, as opposed to Ohio State and how they handled the Tressel situation. I mean, obviously there were already violations on the table when those kids played in the Sugar Bowl, and I don't think they should have ever played in the Sugar Bowl. And I know that there are a lot of Ohio State fans, not all of them, but some of the Ohio State fans out there didn't think they should be playing in the Sugar Bowl either. And now that was just the tip of the iceberg at that point. Now all this other stuff's coming out about Terrell Pryor and the cars and and his housing situation and all this other stuff's all coming to light. And you're hearing from different people who say that maybe Tressel wasn't as good a guy as everyone thought he was. Other people are backing him up. It's become a real mess for them. But I think IU self-reporting, it certainly didn't help the program, but it at least kept the administration holding people accountable for what they did. And self-reporting, I think, really saved face for IU. On the administration side. As far as what Ohio State did, I think they lost a lot of credibility just because, like you said, the president said, well, I hope Coach Tressel doesn't fire me. I'm not going to fire Coach Tressel. And then that was the original thing. And then he gets suspended for 3 games. And then, like you said, it kind of snowballed until the end on Memorial Day. But it's just two trains of thought. One is, football is more important than everything else. And the other one was, basketball is important in Indiana, but it's not that important to cast our integrity into the ocean. So I think those are the two different philosophies that the two schools took it from.
And let me ask you this. Now, with Coach Tressel resigning, all this stuff snowballing at Ohio State, we've recently had issues at USC. When it comes to these different issues, obviously what was going on at USC is a little bit different than what was going on Ohio State. But the question I have for you is, Ed, and I'm not looking for specifics here, but what would be the best way to kind of fix a lot of these problems? I mean, obviously what the players were doing, to a certain extent, maybe the coaches aren't going to know about everything that their players are doing, but it also seems that if you have a good eye on your program, you have a good feel for your program, you could kind of figure out what's going on. What is the best way to handle all this and try to rein in a lot of the abuses that go on?
Well, the topic that always seems to pop up is if the NCAA would compensate the players a little bit, then that would take away their need to go out and get money other ways. But some people are never going to be happy with the amount of money the NCAA gives them, even if they do give them money. I'm not sure there is a really good way to handle it, Ken. I mean, to be honest, you on a football team, there are over 80 scholarship players plus walk-ons.
Sure.
And now you don't have to really worry about the walk-ons taking money or getting perks or anything other than maybe a free Coke or something, which is minuscule. But when you notice your players showing up in new cars every so often, different months, and they don't have the financial support to be turning that trick, I think it's time to start scratching your head a little bit and thinking a little bit about maybe talking to that kid and seeing where he's getting all this stuff from, or maybe you just don't want to know. I think that's what basically it boils down to, is the coaches just want to remain it's plausible deniability. I didn't know it was happening, so it's not my fault type of thing. And I think, if Ohio State gets a book thrown at them, it'll scare some other universities who may be doing similar things or turning their heads when players are rolling up in new rides every 5 months or whatever. But there isn't a really good way to address this situation. I don't think. You could pay the players. Maybe that would take some of it away, but I don't know that it'll fix it for the guys who think they are entitled to making millions of dollars already and they're only a freshman in college.
Now, how about from a penalty standpoint? Coach Tressel resigns. He's lost his job. To me, it seems that maybe you can avoid some of these problems if you see that a coach knew about it and knew about some of these violations and didn't let people know, didn't take the steps necessary to fix it. I mean, to me, there's nothing more powerful than a show cause penalty, and that is basically it. For all intents and purposes, it bars a coach from coaching in college basketball or college football or whatever college sport it might be. To me, that's where you could start to rein some of this stuff in. If you know that if you have an issue and you cover it up or you don't let your compliance people know about it, that you're going to end up affecting your job not only tomorrow but for years in the future. I think that would really get a lot of coaches' attention, because right now, I mean, to a certain extent, yeah, you might have a mark on your name, but a lot of coaches will be able to bounce back. Some of them even go back to taking bigger, better jobs. Maybe leave some allegations in the wake, or leave a job before the hammer really drops. Do you think that from a penalty standpoint, the NCAA could do anything to kind of rein in that kind of thing?
Well, I definitely think you have to impose harsher penalties on the coaches. I mean, that's the first step in solving the problem. Just because, like I said, I mean, the coaches, if they know that they're going to be held responsible regardless of whether or not they knew about it, then they start paying more attention. And if their careers are on the line, then maybe that sharpens their focus a little bit as far as monitoring their players' activities off the field. Like I said, I mean, if Tressel didn't notice that Terrell Pryor was driving different cars every, more than once a year, then he just didn't want to know. I mean, but if his job was on the line, which it ended up being, but that wasn't the reason, and he could have his career jeopardized for and have to go get a job wherever, 9 to 5, maybe he pays attention to what Terrell Pryor's driving and what he's parking in the parking lot every practice. I mean, to a certain extent, you're absolutely right, Ken. I mean, you have to start at the top and work your way down. And I think penalizing the school heavily, not just Ohio State, but anyone. I mean, USC obviously couldn't play in a bowl this season, I'm not sure what all their allegations, the details of all their probation and all that are, but certainly that's a shot to USC. I think it could have been a little bit harsher myself, maybe a 2-year bowl ban or whatever. But Ohio State, they have a chance to. You don't want to make an example of Ohio State, or maybe you do, just to send a message to the rest of the schools out there. But I think that penalizing a coach, if you make that known ahead of time that coaches can be held responsible for their players' actions, then I think suddenly you start to rein some of this in.
Yeah, no question, especially things that coaches should know about, like you said, like their cars and all that. And maybe they're not watching each individual player, but certainly assistant coaches, graduate assistants, everybody kind of can get a feel of who has what, especially when you start talking about cars and things like that in the parking lot. You could go and ask somebody a question and say, hey, anytime you do anything, you got to go through a certain person, otherwise you're going to be missing games. And that I think is going to be interesting. Now, of course, with all the Jim Tressel attention, everybody is looking at that and looking at Ohio State. Wanted to bring up an ESPN.com story about Indiana that ran late last week that many of you already know about, dealing with the A-Hope program and the Indiana Elite AAU program, and former director of basketball operations Drew Adams and his father Mark Adams. And I wanted to ask you about this story because it seems that it's interesting to me that it's not just a matter of the Tressel thing overshadowing something, but it seems that this ESPN.com story didn't have any legs to it, or doesn't have any legs to it really, because of the fact that they did this investigation, and ESPN kind of presented this as being something that was kind of sketchy, save for the fact that it was pretty much public knowledge in Bloomington, just the relationship between all of these different entities. Your thoughts on it, and just the idea that that this was a story that seems to be them trying to make something out of nothing.
Oh, I agree with that. And maybe it's just because my perspective. I'm sure there's Ohio State fans out there who were freaking out about IU basketball a week ago, and now we're all jumping on their case about football. But it's one of these things where, like you said, I mean, the A-Hope organization is, legit from what we understand, and everyone knew that Drew Adams was part of, Coach Crean's staff, and then he went to New Mexico, and because he played it under Steve Alford. I mean, I don't think there's anything sketchy there at all. He was qualified for the job he had at IU. He's qualified to take the job out in Iowa, or not in Iowa, in New Mexico, and I don't see what all the big fuss is about, and I don't even know how Indiana got involved in this, because quite frankly, Hannah Perea isn't even signed yet. I mean, I think they drug Indiana's name into it just to make it more noteworthy, almost. I mean, there's no other reason for them to even be mentioned, other than the fact that they've gotten a lot of kids from Indiana Elite, but that hasn't happened recently. It just started happening when Cody Zeller committed. I mean, Cody Zeller committed, started a domino effect that caused Yogi Ferrell to commit, and Ron Patterson to commit, and Hannah Perea to commit, and Peter Jerkin, who was the first of the 2012 kids to commit. All those kids just kind of, fell into place behind Cody Zeller. So really, until Cody Zeller or actually Austin Etherington was the first one on the Indiana Elite, but until to commit to Indiana, but until Cody Zeller committed and signed, I mean, none of this was even worthy of discussion. I mean, it's not like suddenly out of the blue, all kinds of shady deals are going on, and in the last 3 months. I mean, it's just not happening. I think they were just looking for a reason to get Indiana's name involved with it. And if there's something going on that, Mark Adams shouldn't have bought Hannah Perea a cell phone or a computer or whatever the case may be, that doesn't involve Indiana either. It may affect Perea's status when he gets to Indiana if they haven't gotten it squared away by then. But it wasn't like Tom Crean gave him anything. So I just don't understand how Indiana got mixed up in the whole situation.
Well, and I also think it's interesting, ESPN would trumpeted the fact that they did a 5-month investigation on this. Well, if they would have called any of the local Indiana beat writers, we could have saved them about 4 months and 3 weeks, because we knew everything that was in this. This was nothing that there was a lot of digging involved. I mean, it was a story to where stuff is being put out there, and it just seemed to me that they did this investigation, they found all this information, and there really wasn't a story there. And so they decided, we're going to run with it anyway, because we don't want to waste this 5 months that we spent doing this. And there are no solid allegations of anything, really, outside of dealing with Perea. But even at that, what the purpose of that A-Hope organization is to do exactly what is being done with those players. So I again, if anybody who's listening to this doesn't think Indiana's compliance department isn't hypersensitive to all of these things that go on, whether it be with Drew Adams, whether it be an involvement with a organization like A-Hope, if you think that they are not hypersensitive to that kind of thing, you're crazy. And that's why they have been involved with IU compliance and the NCAA. People signed off on it, and that's what I just this was a story that I just find so fascinating, because it made a splash for a day, and then it disappeared because there's not really any kind of legs to it. So, and like you said, Ed, these players, Indiana Elite, I don't believe is steering them towards one program or the other. Maybe guys go there because they have friends that are playing there. Some of the Indiana Elite players have gone on to other places. The bottom line of it is certain programs tend to funnel into certain other programs. The Bloomington Red AAU program during the Bob Knight years was one. A lot of them would head over towards Indiana. It's just sort of part of the process. But I don't for a second believe that there's anything untoward going with A-Hope and Indiana Elite. I just don't believe that the way that those programs are run is creating anything to where it's undue influence on any of these guys.
Well, here's the other question, Ken, is if you go beyond 2012, you have two kids from 2013 who both played for the Eric Gordon AllStars. So now what are you going to do? Investigate Eric Gordon AllStars for saying that they're guiding guys to IU?
Exactly.
And then in 2014, there are two kids playing for Spiece Indy Heat. So what now, then next year you're going to investigate Spiece Indy Heat for sending two more kids to IU? I mean, like you said, I mean, these kids are all from the state of Indiana almost. Mm-hmm. I mean, why wouldn't, it's either, if you want to stay in state, you're either going to play at Purdue, Butler, Ball State, Notre Dame, or Indiana, for the most part, if you're a high Division I basketball player. I mean, sure, there's other schools out there in the state of Indiana that you could play for, but, I mean, if you want to play big-time basketball, you pick one of those schools, and that's what you do. And, if you want to stay in the state, if you want to go somewhere else, like, well, heck, there's a laundry list of guys who've gotten away from Indiana, from Montross to
Sean May, Tyler Zeller.
May, yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's one of these things where, in fact, the Indy Star quoted Kenny Kaminsky's father at the AU tournament last weekend, and Kenny Kaminsky, who played for Indiana Elite last year, was quoted as saying that, or his father was quoted as saying that Mark Adams never steered him toward Indiana, and he was considering Indiana by himself.
Yep. And
he was never, ever influential in any way, shape, or form about, directing his son to Michigan State or to Indiana or Michigan, maybe end up committing to Michigan State. But, that's just, it's nuts. I mean, there's kids on these teams who go to Purdue. There's kids on these teams who end up playing at Xavier. A lot of them have ended up at Xavier. I mean, it just, like you said, it doesn't have any legs. And I don't know why they even, it is kind of funny that you open up the daily newspapers and you see a picture of Hannah Perea sitting next to Cody Zeller on a bench that says Indiana commit, receives illegal benefits or question mark or something like that. And then poor Cody Zeller's getting dragged in through the mud because he happened to be in the same frame as Hannah Perea.
Exactly.
And people read that headline and they're like, holy cow, IU was tampering with Cody Zeller, and Indiana wasn't tampering with either one of them. So it's really become something out of nothing.
Yeah, it's amazing to me, but it's certainly Hannah Perea. NCAA is looking into the situation. We'll certainly keep an eye on what the NCAA does, but I'd be surprised if there's any kind of long-term impact coming from the story. But folks, that's all the. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to mention that Josh Selby went through a similar situation, but he had been paid thousands and thousands of dollars, or he received thousands and thousands of dollars in gifts and benefits, last year at Kansas, and he got suspended for a few games and then had to pay back the money to charity. So, a worst case scenario is if Perea signs with Indiana eventually, which, it looks like he's going to.
Right.
He'd have to pay back the cost of a cell phone and a computer and an iPod, which is about, $600, $700, $800 maybe.
Yeah.
So I mean, and then he's probably gonna have, if it does come to that, he's gonna serve like a suspension of some sort, probably a few games. So it's nothing major, even if it is, and even if the NCAA does find that there was something illegal going on. But the bottom line is that it doesn't involve Indiana.
Right.
I mean, he's not even an Indiana player yet.
Yeah, and that's why I appreciate Tom Crean jumping, to the defense of his program, because he knows that he's worked hard on trying to rebuild this thing and to have people question. I understand where his frustration would come, again, especially since everything that's out there is stuff that most Indiana fans knew, and it was general knowledge heading up to it. Well, that's all the time that we have for now. Check back here with InsideIndiana.com for the latest on everything Hoosiers. And for Ed Magoni, this is Ken Bikoff. Thanks for listening, and pace yourself.